Today with Mr. Alfred Justice of Paw Paw, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Justice, can you begin by telling us a little bit about your background? To start with, where and when were you born?
I was born in September 1920 in Raven, Virginia.
And did you stay there when you were a kid, or did you move?
No, I stayed there until I entered the service.
All right. What did your family do for a living while you were growing up?
Worked in the coal fields.
Okay. So is this Western Virginia?
Oh, Virginia, Old Dominion.
Right. But kind of up in the hills, not down in Tidewater, Virginia, or something like that.
No, it wasn't on the coast.
No. No coal there. All right. Now, how many kids were in your family?
I had one brother and three sisters.
Right.
And I've only got two sisters. My brother's gone, and one of my sisters is gone. I still have two sisters left.
Mm-hmm. Now, was your father able to keep a job during the 30s, in the Depression era?
No, on and off. In those years, he was an electrician.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me now that he only was employed when they had major catastrophes themselves,
mm-hmm.
and they needed the power.
Right. Now, did he do other kinds of work to get by?
It helped people on the farm.
Right. Okay. Now, how much schooling did you have?
High school.
Okay. So you graduated from high school?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did eventually, but I night school
mm-hmm.
in Waco, Texas.
Okay. Was that when you were in the Army?
Yes,
Okay.
I was.
All right. Now, when did you join the Army?
September 1939.
All right. And why did you join the Army then?
Well, the things were tough, and young people just didn't have any place to go or anything to do. Employment was out of the question, and I would guess that you would have to say that you went to service for survival.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, when you enlisted then, where did they send you for your basic training?
Fort Knox, Kentucky, I took basic.
Okay. And what do you remember about basic training?
I remember that we had an old-timer. If I was given a little time, I could think of his name. Oh, he was tougher than a whale. And he would always tell us that all the tough men died during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he had been a veteran of the war in Europe. He was still in. He was a career, and he would not permit any of us to even have a sip of beer with him. He was against it, and he says, when you get to be soldiers, we'll drink plenty of beer, but not until then.
All right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the Army?
At first, I loved it, and I think that by liking it and going by their rules, I think it helped me.
Did they have you do a lot of physical training? You know, running and that kind of thing?
Oh, and commando things. That was later, after the war was declared.
Right. But at the beginning there, when you're just in basic training, what did the training itself consist of?
Close order drill and calisthenics was the major things, but it was no forced marches or anything like that.
Okay. All right. Now, how long did the basic training last? Goes 2 months or 3 months? Or?
I want to say 2 months.
Okay. And then after you finished the basic training, what did you do next?
I think I was assigned to a gun squad.
Okay.
And we constantly did range practice. And in those days, we were using indirect fire because I was in the artillery. And I didn't use the indirect fire until I went into the tank destroyers.
Right. Okay. So you basically did artillery training next then?
First.
Yeah.
Then tank training next.
Right. So right now we're kind of looking at the first couple of years when you're in the Army, before Pearl Harbor, before things really get going. So you basically, did you join an artillery unit then?
No, I was from basic training. I was assigned an artillery unit.
Okay. And
19th Field Artillery.
Okay. And where were they based?
At that time, I'm going to have to say Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Okay. So you stayed at Fort Knox initially?
Yes, that's where I took my training.
All right. And then, what did you do then between, say, 1939 and 1941 when Pearl Harbor happens? Did you stay in Kentucky or did you go other places?
Basically, I believe we stayed at Fort Knox in Kentucky.
Okay.
Then from there, we migrated to Fort Custer at Battle Creek. We incidentally was the first troops to enter Fort Custer to stay since World War I.
And what condition was Fort Custer in when you got there?
Tense. We were there when they hauled the lumber in and started at nails. But we seemed to like it, all of us.
All right. Now, at what point did you switch from the artillery to the tank destroyers? Because it says, I guess would that have been the summer of 41?
I thought, that's probably right.
Yeah, because the little battalion's book says sort of July of 41, battalion activated from 19th, 46th, 50th, and 21st Field Artillery. So
that would be the dates that.
Right, and so you were at Fort Custer with your unit, and then they created the tank destroyer unit using men from your unit. Okay. Now, at the time you started there, this was the very beginning, were they creating a cadre for the battalion then?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your job then to start with?
I'm not absolutely sure about that, but I can, the first job I can recall having was I was picked for a school assignment to teach tactics for tankers
Mm-hmm.
at Fort Hood, Kentucky, or Fort Hood, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's the first that I can recall
Okay.
of an actual job.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there, it seems, a couple of years,
Okay. I think that.
and went from there to Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
Yep, I think that. Right. Yeah, that does follow that. So let's see. Now, do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor happened?
Battle Creek.
Okay. And how did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
There was, of course, you must understand we were just 18 and 19-year-olds, but somehow we'd got some beer. We had a couple, 3 bunks drawn up together, and there's 4 or 5 of us having a little party of our own, and someone had a radio that they brought in, and we heard the news on the radio, and I don't know whether it was out of our crew or someone else scaled the fence and went someplace in the Battle Creek area and got more beer.
I'm not sure why. There's a phone ringing over there, but okay. Now, do you think did your attitude change a little bit once you found
Mine
out?
did, I'm sure.
Did you take the job more seriously, or?
I'm sure I did, and I took everything a little more seriously.
Okay. And then not too long after that was when you moved down to Texas. All right. Now, so you were training other men to fight in tanks?
Yes,
Okay. Now, did you have any background in that yourself?
none whatsoever.
Okay.
I had a wonderful experience in that time of my life. I come to the classroom on Monday morning, and I had 3 Marine officers, field officers, in my class that wasn't supposed to be there. I don't know why that rule was in effect, but it was. And we all 3 clashed right away. They didn't like me, and I didn't like them. And but we somehow, I don't know anymore how, but we learned to live with each other. And I believe that when they graduated from that class and left there, went back to their own units, they wrote letters to put in my, I think it was called 301 file, or in my permanent file anyway. And I do believe sincerely that through that they helped me when I got commissioned, because they had told me that somewhere, I've still got those letters, they told me if I ever wanted to change from the Army and go in the Marine Corps, that they'd do anything and everything they possibly could to welcome me in with rank.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that.
That's a pretty big thing. The Army and the Marines still don't always get along so well.
And I didn't with them guys. But nevertheless, they were super, super guys, human beings.
Right. Okay. Now, you're in what's called a tank destroyer battalion. And in the U.S. Army in World War II, tank destroyer could mean a few different things. What kind of weapons or equipment did your battalion have to start with?
I think that the big weapon was a 76 millimeter gun. And that, I think, went to a 90 millimeter and a 3-inch. And after the war, we still had the 3-inch. But I have no idea what they have now.
Mm-hmm. Now, were these guns towed behind trucks or half-tracks, or?
No, they were mounted.
Okay, so they were mounted. So they were mounted on tank chassis?
On the turret tank.
Okay.
And you could fire them from inside the tank.
Mm-hmm. Now, was the turret an open-top turret? I mean, could you, if you're in the turret up by the gun, did you have a roof over your head?
But we had, there was two pieces of metal there that created a hatch that we could close and seal it in. Any place we moved anywhere, we had infantry that looked like bugs piled all over. I don't know sometimes how we kept from losing them, but we didn't, and luckily.
All right. Now, when you were down at Fort Hood, were you going out on a lot of maneuvers and driving around the countryside?
Yes, and firing range, and we were out in the boondocks constantly, in the sand, a lot of sand.
All right. Now, about how long do you think you stayed down in Texas?
Well, it was been from whatever your date you just looked up there a minute ago, that we went there from Fort Jackson.
Yeah.
From then until we were deployed.
Right. So Fort Hood, you get there in August of 42, and then Fort Jackson, September 43. So you've got about a year in Texas and about a year in South Carolina before they actually ship you out. Now, were you mostly working as a training unit?
All the time.
Okay, you were training other men to go into newly formed units.
We had it was classes of school.
Mm-hmm. Right. So as an instructor in the school, do you remember what rank you were at?
Staff sergeant.
Okay, so you were up to sergeant level. Now, what was your daily life like when you were in Texas or South Carolina? Do you have a regular routine that you followed?
Oh yes, I'm going to say that our first class, which probably started at 9 o'clock and ended no doubt at 4:30 or 5 at retreat. We did have night movements too, but not very often. Not weekly or daily or anything like that.
And as a sergeant and an instructor in the school, you got to go off base and do other things?
Yes. Lots of the guys had their wives there.
Now, were you married at this time?
No.
Okay. So when you went off base, what did you do?
Probably to the movies.
Mm-hmm. Was there any place to go near Fort Hood, or is it kind of out in the country?
I'd say it's, the latter, out the country, because it was new. They had just opened up the reservation, and everything was in the process of building, including the town.
Okay. And then when you moved to South Carolina, what was life like there?
Oh, well, that was established, and it was a nice facility, and the whole thing was just an absolute turnaround from what we had in Texas. Streets without bugs on them, and even boulevards with trees.
Now, were you happy with the job of being an instructor, or did you want to actually get into the action?
I can't truthfully say that I ever really wanted to go into action. I don't believe I did anyway. But certainly when I got there, I accepted it.
Now, did you expect that sooner or later you would go?
I certainly did.
Okay. And were you surprised that it took as long as it did for them to send you?
I am.
All right. Now, finally, you start to get orders to start moving around October of '44. It's after D-Day, this kind of thing. And then in December, you actually set sail. Now, do you remember what port you sailed out of?
New York City.
Okay.
And there was a thing about that too, and I often think about this. I was, as a tourist, in the Empire State Building, and I think a maintenance man, I'm sure he's had something to do with the staff of the building, come up to me. I was looking out at the boats at dock, and he says, "Son, you have any idea when you're going to sail?" And I said, "No, I certainly don't." And he said, "Come here, and I'm going to show you the ship you're going to go on." And he took me over to one of the big windows, looking out the direction of the piers, and he pointed out to Queen Mary. And he says, "That right there is what you'll go on." And I've often thought, if he knew that, or thought that even, the enemy knew it too. And boy, in that time of the conflict, the German U-boats was having a field day.
Well, they weren't really having a field day by the fall of '44, but they were still out there. They were still dangerous.
And you take a boat with 16,000 combat troops on it, is quite a kill.
But they never got her.
No, luckily.
All right. So, and so you did sail on the Queen Mary?
Did.
Okay. Now, what was that ship actually like when they, as a troop ship, how was it set up?
It wasn't plush. The only good thing we had about it was that Glenn Miller's orchestra was aboard.
Wow.
And we didn't do without entertainment. They entertained us constantly.
All right.
I believe a fellow by the name of Tex Bennicke's got that orchestra now, but still in existence.
Yes, it is. All right. Now, did the ship sail by itself or with a convoy?
Alone.
And do you know why it sailed alone?
Because of its speed.
Yep.
But we still used the zigzag maneuver.
Do you remember what the weather was like when you were crossing the ocean?
Going over, I would consider it beautiful, but coming home is horrible.
All right. And it took you about a week to get across the Atlantic going over?
And as I recall, something like 3 weeks coming back on a Liberty ship. And the water was so rough. In the North Atlantic, when we come back in December, of course it was December going over and December coming back.
All right. We had gotten you in your story, you had landed Firth of Clyde, so Glasgow or that area of Scotland. Okay, you get off. Now, did they move you to someplace in England for a while?
Yes, they had, the boat was so big they didn't have any facility big enough to pier the boat. So we had to take probably 50 or 75 men at a time to shore by boat. Then from there they trucked us to a camp in England, and I don't recall where in England that was.
And did you stay there for a while?
Yes, just
So it looks like
a day or two.
Because it says here, let's see, you go to something called Blackshaw Moor in Staffordshire, and you're there late December, and about a month later you sail from England over to France.
Across the channel.
Yeah, so you've got about a month in camp in England. Do you remember Christmas that year?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay, because it looks like you were there over Christmas, but not much must have happened. Okay, now they have you in late January. Now you sail across to Le Havre in France, and you get off there, and then what do you remember landing in France?
I do.
Okay, and what was that like, or what happened then?
Well, we was in a landing ship tank that we went over on, and the front end come out of the thing, and we fired up the tanks and rolled up on the beach, and we went ashore.
Okay, now at this point, were you a tank commander, or were you with
I was a platoon commander.
Okay. And so,
No, wait a minute, I was a platoon sergeant.
okay. And so were you had a tank that you were riding in, or a tank destroyer you were riding in?
I had one I rode in, but I was in charge of 4 tanks.
Right. Okay, and so you drive off, and then did they just have you drive across France and into Belgium, or did they load you on trains, or what?
No, we went by tank.
And what do you remember about the kind of drive there to get up to the front?
There's no fighting whatsoever. I can't even remember hearing a rifle shot.
Because according to because the Battle of the Bulge had been defeated, the Germans were pushed back at that point. So you're getting up to the front and then getting ready to eventually start attacking. But it looks like you go across and actually into Belgium and even into Germany. And so you're in Western Germany by the time you actually get into action.
It's very true.
Okay. Now, do you remember anything about the countryside you drove through, or what it looked like, or what the weather was like?
The weather started getting cold and snowy. The countryside, I would call it farm country.
And did you see much battle damage or signs of the war, or was it mostly in good shape?
In the little hamlets we did.
Mm-hmm. And did you see much of the civilians or the people going about their business now?
Yes, and they would intermingle with us. I was even pleasantly surprised about that after the war, that the German population accepted that's the way they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they were sincere about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, do you remember when your unit first actually went into action?
No, I don't believe so. It must have been just an outside incident. Maybe surprise somebody digging in or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, did your unit get into some serious combat with the Germans?
On occasion.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of things would happen if you run into some Germans and they're fighting back? Did they attack you, or you're attacking them?
A little of both, I believe. I always thought that the Germans were terribly bad marksmen, and I was proud of it. And I also had a theory that the reason for that to be in that he being Hitler, didn't have the source or the money to buy practice ammunition.
So when the Germans fired at you, they missed a lot?
Yes,
Okay.
luckily.
Now,
I was proud of that.
all right. And did you do a better job of hitting them?
Oh, much better.
Okay. Now, were you firing against German tanks or mostly fortified positions or things like that?
Both.
Okay.
More single personnel than tanks.
And when you did encounter tanks, were your guns effective or not?
Not really. We knew to not engage them dudes because we were certainly to a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Well, a tank destroyer doesn't have much armor on it. I mean, even compared to a regular Sherman. So you had to be pretty careful.
Well, if we got hit in the side, anywhere, either side, by an 88, we were done for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, did your battalion lose many vehicles, or did it do pretty well?
Done better than average.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, there were a couple of campaigns that your unit was part of. I mean, one of them was you're crossing the Rhine and you're fighting around the Ruhr pocket area. As you were getting into Germany, into these areas, were you facing a lot of opposition, or I mean, was it hard going sometimes?
No, not really. When we left the area of the Siegfried line, we started getting in the countryside more.
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty clear sailing.
Okay.
And after the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans were so confused that they were all but done. Yeah, I don't believe they even had any will to fight anymore.
Well, some of them did. The SS troops did, and
Yeah.
there were still a lot of casualties, through April. But you were mostly operating out in open country, though. They didn't send you into the cities and towns, at least not to fight.
No.
Okay. Now, as you moved across Germany, while the war was still going on, did you see much of the civilians, or did they stay out of your way?
No, we saw it.
Okay. And would you talk to them at all, or they talk to you?
Yes. Both.
Okay. And what do you remember about them, or what did you learn from them, or?
I even had a conversation with a young doctor, German doctor, one time. I could not understand why German women so readily took up with American men. And he had a good explanation, I thought. He says, well, it would be the same if these Germans come to your country under the same condition. He says, first of all, you guys come in here, you're robust, you're strong, not only look strong, you are strong, and your cheeks are rosy. He even pinched the side of my face. And he says, why wouldn't they go for something like that? He says, our boats, even harbors that have got fruit laying there rotting, say bananas, our boats would back out of the harbor and come home, because you can't build anything for the war machine out of a banana. So he says, some of these men have never even saw a banana. And here you guys get all this food that's necessary, and that's why they go for you. And I felt like that was an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But it still kind of bothers me that happened.
So were there some American troops who were not behaving very well?
Yes, even to the point that occasionally we even had one that went into a house, and they had 2 or 3 little girls there. One of the girls was 16, I recall, and he raped her 2 or 3 times, and they court-martialed him, of course, and he was sent back to Leavenworth, Kansas.
Okay.
And but it did happen.
Mm-hmm. And was there looting or stealing and that kind of thing as you went through places?
Not by our men that
Okay.
I'm aware of.
All right. Now, as you were traveling through Germany, then, while the war's still going on, would you sleep in houses when you could, or just
Yes.
Okay.
We just, if we decided to take over a house, we did it, just took it over, that's all.
Mm-hmm.
The people had to fend for themselves.
Okay. Well, that kind of thing does create an opportunity for some men to take something with them when they leave. But
Well, that could have been, but I wasn't
Right.
aware of it.
okay. But basically, you moved through Germany, and do you remember how far you got into Germany? Because you crossed the Rhine, you keep going. Do you remember where you wound up, or where you were when the war ended?
It seems to me that I was around Darmstadt when the war ended.
Okay. And did things change then once the Germans surrendered? Or how did things change after that?
Well, of course, in my case, I was assigned to the military government, and I was given a certain area to patrol, about the size of one of our counties. And occasionally you'd run into problems because we had a curfew, and that was the biggest thing, is violating the curfew. But all in all, they honored it pretty much.
Now, how many men were you in charge of, or how large was your unit?
As I recall, I must have had around 60 men.
Now, were you an officer by then?
I was.
Okay. When did you get promoted? When did you get your commission?
I don't recall.
Do you remember if it was before or after the war ended?
Well before.
Okay. So was it while you were on campaign in Germany?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, just prior, very shortly before the Battle of the Bulge, it was in that general area where I was promoted.
Okay. Now, what happened to the man you replaced? Was he promoted or was he hurt?
Hurt.
Okay. And how did the men respond when you got promoted?
Luckily for me, I continued the same job I had with the same men I had. So that was a plus for me.
Because as platoon sergeant, you were already their leader.
Yes.
And now you just get the rank.
Took stripes off of my arm and put them on my collar.
All right. Now, when you were in Germany, did you see any of the concentration camps?
I did.
Okay. And what do you remember about that?
Well, not that we went in to take it or anything, we just seemed to come up on it this one day. They had opened the gates, and they were pretty much cleaned it up. And we took part in that, and bodies were stacked, and it looked worse than cordwood. And they had them stacked on what I would call hay rakes, around their farm equipment,
right.
And just that they were hauling them to dispose of the bodies, and hundreds and hundreds of them.
And did you understand yet what had gone on, or did the Army tell you what all of that was about?
I think we knew.
Okay. Now, did you see any of the displaced persons? You had the people the Germans had brought in from different places now.
We did.
And what do you remember about them?
They were scared and hungry.
Did they get moved along by the Army or somebody pretty quickly, or they just wandered around?
I'm going to say wander around.
Mm-hmm.
Just helter-skelter, you know.
Now, did any of them talk to you, or?
Yes, we would from time to time get as best we could with the language barrier.
Mm-hmm. And do you know where they were from?
We would finally make out the country that they were from.
And do you remember if they were mostly from Eastern Europe, from Russia or Poland, or if they were Netherlands or France?
I'm going to say the majority that I had contact with were Polish.
Mm-hmm. And did they want to go back to Poland, or?
Yes, of
Okay.
course.
All right. All right. Now, you were there in the Army of Occupation through most of the rest of 1945. So you're there. You said you were sort of in charge of a particular district. Now, was this a country, a rural area, or were there towns?
No, not towns,
Okay.
little farm
Villages?
villages.
Okay. Now, were there local officials or people that you worked with regularly? Did you have Germans who were helping you?
Well, at one time in the area I was assigned, I had a hospital, and that was an area that I guess maybe I enjoyed it, and I worked closely with them. And every morning we had to check. There was an awful lot of death in that facility, and we'd have to check and double check because it was always the fear that we'd release somebody that we shouldn't, even though maybe we called somebody dead when he wasn't, and that was close. Checked awful close.
Mm-hmm. So were there a lot of problems with diseases, with epidemics or things like that?
No, sir, that I know of.
Well, if people were dying,
The wounds.
okay. So these were civilians or soldiers?
A lot of leg and limb
Mm-hmm.
and gangrene and
Okay.
that sort of thing. And that absolutely, in that duty I performed there, I learned what misery meant.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't have any, I don't think they even had aspirin to,
So was this hospital treating German civilians or former soldiers, or?
soldiers.
Okay.
It was all soldiers,
Okay. So it was an Army hospital.
yeah.
But the U.S. Army wasn't providing them with medicine, or?
You had some.
But not enough.
No, not near enough.
All right. Now, as time went on, they would send American soldiers home once they got enough points. Now, how was it? So did you not have a lot of points because you were in the U.S. so long, or how did that work?
I had well beyond the points that I needed.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons that I thought for sure that I would go in the way of Japan.
Mm-hmm. But Japan surrendered in August, so after that, you're still there. Okay, so they kept basically, so did other men in your unit go home before you did?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Now, when the time came to go home, did you go together with your unit or just by yourself?
No, there was quite a few of us went at one time.
Okay.
Now, I don't know whether it was a whole company or not. I don't recall.
All right. Now, while you were staying in Europe after the war was over, did you get to do any traveling? Did you have some leave time?
I could have, but I didn't use it.
Okay. Well, at some point you got down to Caen, down to the French Riviera.
Well, that was during the combat years.
I mean, before the Germans surrendered?
Yes.
How'd you manage that?
I had something, some kind of a stomach disorder
Okay.
that I could eat, but I would upchuck it.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't. I think they called it a nerve disorder of some kind. And they sent me, of all things, there to convalesce. So
And did
that's
they?
the place to do it, I'll tell you.
Mm-hmm. So do you remember about how long you were down there?
I do believe a month.
Okay. And you also got to London at some point. Was that part of the same thing? Or was that later or earlier?
Earlier.
Okay. That might have been, since you had a month in England before you went over.
Yeah, I think
that
that's
probably
where I
fit
got
in
to
there.
London.
Okay. All right. So basically after the war, so you're convalescent for a while, you go back to your unit in Germany, end the war with them, and then you stay there in the Army of Occupation. Okay. Then you get to the end of the year, and finally you get to go home. Now, do you remember where you sailed out of? Did you go back from Le Havre, or did you go somewhere else? And when you got the Liberty ship?
I'm going to say that it was in England, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. No, it might have been.
Yeah, I know that it was a real dandy ship, Seahawk, a Liberty ship. It took us better than 3 weeks, I think,
Mm-hmm.
to come back. We were sure full of that.
Mm-hmm. Did everybody get sick?
Oh, including me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did you ever feel like you weren't going to make it? Like the ship might sink?
We all did, because the seas were so rough that we thought the thing would break in two. It would reek and creak and pop. It was an old Liberty ship, something they pressed into service.
Well, Liberty ships were pretty new, but they could wear out. So this one was not in good shape when you were on it. Now, do you remember?
Rosie Riveter put a lot of work in that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, did you go back to New York or someplace else?
Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia.
Okay. All right. And then once they got you back home again, did they discharge you right away, or did they send you somewhere else?
No, I was lucky. Of course, the staging area, Camp Patrick Henry, they was nice to me and put me in charge of the troop train coming back to Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't think of the name of the fort in Indianapolis.
Camp Atterbury, probably, or
That's what it was, Camp Atterbury.
a lot of guys got discharged there. All right. And then you got to go home.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, where was home then?
Niles, Michigan.
Okay. Had your family moved there while you were gone, or how did that happen?
No, I married a girl, that's where she lived.
Okay. And when did you meet her? Or where were you when you met her?
At Fort Custer.
Okay.
I met her at a Cass County fair.
Okay. Okay. So basically you met her when you were at Camp Custer. So were you engaged at this point when you got home, or were you already married?
I was already married.
Okay. And when did you get married?
43, I believe.
Okay. And did she come down and follow you to the bases that you were stationed at?
One time, and that was in Fort Hood, Texas.
Okay. But otherwise she just stayed back home?
Yeah.
Okay. And now, when you got out then, What kind of work did you go into?
I went to work. First of all, I tried a job at Tyler Refrigeration, and that I didn't like, and or it didn't like me, one of the other. And then I went to work for the New York Central Railroad, and I loved that. That's where I stayed the rest of my working.
Okay. And what kind of work did you do for them?
Well, I was a trainman. First, a good many years, I worked as a switchman. Then I worked as a fireman on an engine.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was doing when I retired.
And did you stay in a particular area, or would you?
In Niles.
Okay. So you could do that from Niles? You weren't going
To
across
and
the country?
from Chicago.
Okay. All right. Now, when you think
Freight.
right. Okay. When you think back a little bit over the time that you spent in the Army, now, are there particular events or things that happened that kind of stand out in your memory that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Are there particular people that you remember out of your unit, or?
Right away, there's one guy from Bay City, Michigan, that pops up at me, and I don't know where he is right now, but I'm quite sure he's still alive. His name happens to be Fred Sadlick, and occasionally I will get a little note from one of his girls. He's got two girls.
Mm-hmm.
And recently I got a note from one of them. She's in the state of Missouri, and I assume she married some guy from out there.
Mm-hmm.
But him and I were great friends, and that, as soon as you mentioned that, his name popped right up.
So was he in your unit with you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then if you kind of think back over the time in the Army, how do you think that affected you? I mean, were you different when you came out than when you went in?
Much so. For the better of my dad. I have been a fortunate man. I'm 91 years old, and I believe I've had a terrific life. God's been good to me. Everyday life, my family life, particularly my family. They're super, and I've got a good association with them, and I'm going to keep them.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story. So thank you very much for coming in and telling it to me today.
Okay.
All right.